Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Donna Heitmanek, and I'm the founder of the Facebook groups Science of Reading, What I Should Have Learned in College. We are happy to host the National Center for Improving Literacy's monthly series, Educators' Science of Reading Toolbox. Tonight's event is called Intensifying Reading Instruction for Students Who Are Not Making Desired Progress. Our speaker tonight is Mary Murray Stowe, who works with teachers, administrators, instructional coaches, directors, and coordinators of special education through the Training and Technical Assistance Center at William and Mary and the Virginia Department of Education as an educational specialist. Mary is certified as a CIM, Certified Learning Strategy Professional Developer, and CER Professional Developer, Certified Local Letters Classic Trainer, and Letters 3rd Edition Facilitator. Currently, Mary is a doctoral student in special education and serves as the president of the Virginia branch of the International Association. Welcome, Mary, and now it's all yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Donna. And luckily, I finished the doctoral work, so I am free now for a while and trying to figure out what to do with my time. So welcome, everyone, this evening, and thank you for joining me for this session on intensifying reading instruction. And as Donna indicated, this series is based on the Educator's Science of Reading Toolbox. A link has been placed in the chat to the document and information associated with this particular educator toolbox so that you can access that more easily. If you are not able to access the toolbox through the chat, then you can find it on the website. I do want to introduce you to the National Center on Improving Literacy. It is a partnership among literacy experts, university researchers, and technical assistance providers, and it is funded through the United States Department of Education. Our mission is to increase access to and use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach students with literacy disabilities, including dyslexia. You can notice on the screen that you have at least 3 avenues for contacting us, one through the website, another through X, formerly Twitter, and then through Facebook as well. Our learning intentions for this evening is the hope that everyone will leave with an increased ability to intensify reading instruction for certain students within your classroom who may need those more intense interventions, but also to raise awareness or provide an increased awareness of the NCIL resources for implementing evidence-based literacy practices. So let's take a look for just a moment at 2 perspectives on teaching and learning. Before I read them or put them up, or discuss them, I'm going to put them up just so that you can take a look at them and consider each one. So let's take a look at perspective number 1. And then let's take a look at perspective number 2.
Yeah, crazy how our lives have changed, right?
So when we think about perspective number 1, we do see that the responsibility for the learning is placed on the student. So we think about what is it about this student? What is it about this student that makes his or her learning difficult for them? But with the second perspective, we think about instruction and what about the instruction makes it difficult for the student to learn. So this makes us begin to think about what do we need to consider when we are designing instruction. So let's also think about why should we intensify instruction? So it's something really we need to consider. When we think about intensifying instructional delivery, the reason or rationale for doing that is to accelerate learning so that students who are having difficulty learning to read we can narrow or eliminate the gaps of where they are and where they need to be, and then they can reach grade level expectations. So it's extremely important that we consider how to intensify instructional delivery, because given today's reading crisis, we really do need to think about moving students along to a place where they are acquiring grade level mastery of reading standards and continue to close that gap for students. So because we are looking at intense interventions or intense instruction, we need to think about how we're going to use that intensification, because it means we're adding more to instruction. We're also using many resources to address those student needs. So we need to make sure that we are using that for those students who are most at need for that. So students who are not making enough growth given our core instruction, tier 1 instruction, and so on, and even tier 2 instruction. But then also for those students who are significantly behind their peers in acquiring grade level standard work. So let's think about our own experience with intensifying instruction, or intensifying an activity or experience for ourselves. So think about health or exercise or money matters, and how did we intentionally layer on more steps to reach the goal that we had in mind? And so this gives us a little bit of an idea of all of the pieces that we need to consider when we're designing more intense instruction for students who are not making the desired progress that is expected. So what does that look like when we are intensifying instruction? So what you'll see in front of you is a mixer, an audio mixer, where we have a lot of input and we have to modulate or work the levers to make sure that we have the just right sound quality output. So we think about all of the input coming together. We need to modulate it at various levels, at various pieces, and then hope for the desired high quality output that students will be able to achieve. So we need to think about the critical areas that research tells us are important for all readers. We also need to think about the students' specific reading difficulties they experience in relationship to the critical areas of reading instruction. We need to think about other pieces as well in regard to cognitive processing issues that students might experience, and how we're going to address those pieces as well. This might lead us to think that we might need a framework for addressing these issues and designing appropriate instruction for students. So I'm going to take a moment and let you just look at the infographic that is displayed on the screen. It is the intensification framework that NCIL has developed in regard to providing for us the what and how of more intense intervention for students with reading difficulties. So I'm going to be silent for just a moment and let you intake all that is on the slide, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so I'm going to move around the framework with this view before I begin to jump into each of the content areas of the intensification framework. You'll notice that within the larger, more bolded square, we have 4 quadrants of the what and the how that we need to consider when we are intensifying interventions for students. But what drives that work for us? It's the dynamic and responsive data-based individualization process that we need to think about for students that will drive this process for intensification. A link will be placed in the chat leading you to the data-based individualization work that's provided from the National Center on Intensive Interventions. So let's begin to think about also what is necessary to consider as well, other than reading content, cognitive processing, instructional design, and instructional delivery. You'll notice right on the outside of the box is a box that talks about assessment. So assessment is a critical piece, or ongoing assessments are a critical piece to assuring that intensification is really meeting the needs of the student. So we might think of this as a cyclical process where we collect data. The data informs the instruction that we're going to provide. The instruction is provided, more data is collected, it is analyzed, and then it drives the next piece of instruction. Instruction happens, we collect data again to drive the instruction, to make sure that we're on target in all of these areas for meeting the needs of students. So I love to think about this in that very cyclical process, that we collect data, we instruct, we collect data, we instruct, and we're always informing the work that we're doing for students to assure that we are on target to assist with closing the skill gaps that we talked about as the why for intensifying instructional delivery. A link has been placed in the chat for you to lead you to the brief and infographic description of this intensification framework as well. So let's jump into each component of the framework and let's think about reading content. And so you'll notice that we talk about phonological awareness or phonemic awareness in some versions. We think about alphabetic understanding or phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And so we will notice that this information or these 5 components come to us from the National Reading Panel that completed its very seminal work. And that we know that these 5 components of reading instruction are necessary components for a well-rounded work within reading instruction. But what might some of this look like? So we might be teaching students academic language skills, including the use of inferential and narrative language and vocabulary knowledge. But we also, with reading content, might be developing awareness of segments of sounds in speech and how they link to letters, essentially mapping phonemes to graphemes. We might be teaching students to decode words or analyze word parts or morphemes within words, and then writing and recognizing words. Another piece of reading content might be ensuring that students read connected text every day to support reading accuracy, fluency, and comprehension. We might teach students how to use reading comprehension strategies, such as identifying text structures. We might teach students to learn to identify organizations within or other organizations within text, or even organizations at the sentence level. When we're considering reading content, we need to be very purposeful in selecting text to support whatever it is in within the reading content that we want to assure students are learning. We might be building students' decoding skills so that they can read complex multisyllabic words. All of these opportunities are pieces of reading content that must be considered as we work with students and design instruction for them. But it also helps us know that even though these are all the 5 necessary components, a student's need may be very targeted within those components. So let's move further to the what in cognitive processing. And when we think about cognitive processing, there are 2 kinds of embedded teaching strategies that we need to consider. supports that the teachers might use with their instruction. These might be scaffolds, they might be modeling and think aloud strategies. But then we also need to think about supports which students learn to deploy or activate on their own. So these might be note-taking skills that we need for them to develop. There might be procedural checklists that we develop with the students that assist them in assuring that they complete the steps of a process. They might even be prompting sheets that students might need to engage in the work that we're asking them to consider. So when you look at the screen, you'll see under cognitive processing, we have memory considerations, self-regulation considerations, and then self-efficacy considerations as well for students. So when we think about processes that control part of these areas, we think about executive functioning skills, where the learner might need to cue other cognitive capacities, where they might need to be thinking about reasoning and language and visual spatial orientation and their memory regulation and input and things of that nature. But they might also need to consider or enable a person to engage in behaviors that will lead to more successful learning, which include being purposeful, being organized, being strategic, being self-regulated, being goal-directed, and so on. So when students are able to self-regulate, it supports ownership of their own learning. And some of what we might do to support that for students is helping them plan and set goals. So involve them in that process. But we also want them to monitor their own learning and be able to chart or track that work as well. So we could assist with self-regulation through helping them understand how to set their own goals and then monitor progress toward achieving that goal. We also want to help them learn to deploy language and memory supports for learning, such as being able to self-talk, use strategies like social scripts to engage in the work that we're doing. But we also need to help them attend to the work that we're asking them to do. So to regulate their attentional pieces as well. So in potential intensification of instruction by helping students focus on goals might include, again, setting goals and monitoring their own learning, tracking their own learning, but also asking or monitoring their learning. So this is a very critical and piece to this whole process. They might set goals, they might track their progress, but they need to also be able to ask themselves questions along the way. Did I understand what I was just asked to do? Do I understand how to deploy this skill that I'm being asked to do? Did I do it as I should have done it? So we need students to be able to ask themselves those questions. We also need for them to positively support themselves through self-talk, through I am statements. So we want to encourage a growth-based mindset rather than a fixed mindset as they complete this more intense work that we're asking them to do. Moving now to the how, so you notice that we've moved to the lower portion of the square, and we're going to consider the how components. The first how component that we're going to consider is instructional design. And so when we think about instructional design, we do need to think about five principles that guide instruction and that are key to the work that we need to do. So we think about explicit instructional techniques and strategies. We think about instructional scaffolding. We think about strategic integration, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a second. We also need to think about primed background knowledge and then student practice and review. And so these are all the critical instructional components that we need to think about. Specifically, let's think about what strategic integration means. So when we say that, what are we considering? This is something I spoke about just a few moments ago as well, when we thought about all of those 5 components that are necessary for developing appropriate and skilled reading abilities and capacities. We also need to think about what is the student really struggling with, and then we integrate that particular work within this consideration of all of the 5 big ideas. So our instructional plan for students needs to be thought about across the entire school day and needs to be considered throughout that day. How are we going to intensify instruction within that day, within that targeted area, but yet also think about all of the other work that we need to do? So one example of that might be, this is just one piece, we might know that students benefit from being pre-taught some skills that they're going to later encounter in a class in reading instruction. It can be a powerful intensification strategy. But what does it require? It requires coordination among professionals within that building. It requires the collaborative piece as well to make sure that that happens. So when we think about instructional design, we really need to think about how we're going to provide that work on that targeted need that the student really has. And we are going to provide explicit and systematic instruction. And later in this evening's presentation, we're going to take a look at how explicit or more explicit instruction becomes across the tiers within an MTSS model, but we're also going to look at how it becomes more systematic as well. But then another piece that you'll note here on instructional design is review and mastery. This requires practice, and we need to think about purposefully providing practice for students so that they can master what we're asking them to master. And then finally, within the how section, we have instructional delivery. We think about time, duration, group size, pace, and so on. And so when we adapt instructional delivery, it increases the amount of time students spend learning and practicing reading skills. And the pace of learning within that fixed amount of time needs to be increased by student engagement. So we need to think about how can we best engage students in the work that needs to happen. This includes thinking about frequency of intervention, the length of instructional sessions, the duration of the intervention, and then movement decisions really need to be made based on the student's achievement level. Is it below grade level expectations? What is the length and frequency of previous interventions? What are the complexity of those learning tasks that we're really asking the student to engage with? And then we also have school and student factors to consider as well. The instructional group size might be reduced, and research suggests and tells us that small groups of 2 to 4 students or one-on-one instruction may provide the most intensive intervention and yield similar results. But when group size is decreased, the teacher's attention is divided among fewer students, meaning that the teacher can increase his or her potential for more individualized instruction, more student response time or opportunities for students to respond, more practice opportunities for students as well, and more time for teachers to provide feedback to students. So reducing student-teacher ratio impacts learning intensity. So all of these important factors to consider when we think about putting together intensive interventions for students. And that's why it is considered within that larger block of time and or larger part of the infographic. We need to consider the what, we need to consider the how, It's driven by data-based individualization, but it's also driven by assessments that guide and inform all of the what and how as well. So let's take a look at some examples of what intensification might look like. Okay, so we're at tier 3. We're thinking about the components of reading instruction that we talked about just a few moments ago. So we look at the reading content side down the left-hand column. We're going to address phonemic awareness, alphabetic understanding thinking, accuracy and fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. So what are some examples of ways that we might intensify instructional delivery in each of these areas? So with phonemic awareness, we might think about digging deeper or teaching deeper levels of phonemic awareness, especially in the realm of how to manipulate at the phoneme level. So we might ask students to say cat, and then we ask them instead of k, to substitute p, and thereby manipulating phonemes. That's just one way of phoneme manipulation through a deletion task and then a substitution task. When we're looking at alphabetic understanding or phonics instruction, we might use spelling to teach reading, or we might use orthographic mapping techniques for students to be able to do that. We might incorporate writing with our decoding related instruction as well. We might think about providing decoding work and then encoding work, decoding work and then encoding work. So back-to-back techniques. Let's think about accuracy and fluency. So we might use connected text and technical applications for students to practice. And those technical applications might be to look at words within that connected text that they may be experiencing difficulty with. And we might analyze the words that they are experiencing difficulties with. We might have noticed a pattern of words or structures of words that students are having difficulty being able to decode. And so we might spend some time analyzing those particular pieces. With vocabulary instruction, we might promote generative processing by promoting students' use of targeted vocabulary words in spoken and written language. We might generalize the use of morphemes across various combinations and recombinations so that students do understand that morphemes do generalize and can be used in multiple words, maintaining a meaning but being changed with adding of prefixes and suffixes or the combination of Greek combining forms. When we think about comprehension instruction, we might explicitly teach comprehension through the use of questioning techniques to help guide our use of text structures. We might even look at sentence level comprehension and understanding the structure of a sentence. We might use text structures as a way to frame our retelling of a story. So these are just some examples of methods for intensifying instructional delivery in each of the 5 areas of reading instruction. So let's look at some additional examples. So when we think about cognitive processing and self-regulation, we need to think about working memory and inhibitory control and attentional flexibility. So what are some examples there? So when we think about working memory, and we know that many of our students are compromised in regard to working memory, we think about examples of work with them where we might integrate writing for the ultimate purpose of helping them take notes. We might incorporate self-monitoring and self-evaluation checklists that they will then become responsible for using and following. We might use models and demonstrations and think alouds so that students do understand exactly what the expectations are so that they know exactly what they need to do. They also, through the use of think alouds, know what they should be thinking and considering as they're moving through this work as well. And then we need to also check for understanding frequently. So if working memory is an issue that students might encounter, then we want to make sure that we stop every so often to make sure that what we've been delivering has been understood by the student. This also helps model for students that they should be stopping along the way to monitor their own understanding of the work that they're doing as well. So let's think about inhibitory control and attentional flexibility. We again might incorporate procedural checklists and prompt sheets that students can use to follow a process that we've taught them to use in regard to the reading work that they must do. We model think aloud strategies so that they do know exactly what they should be thinking as they're moving through the processes as well. Let's think about attribution. So for self-efficacy, to support self-efficacy, we may want to incorporate reward charts or token systems because we want students to have or develop growth mindsets and that the mindset of, I can do this. I am able to do this. I can be successful at doing this. And so we might incorporate rewards systems in regard to that work. We might also want to include goal setting and then graphing of the work as they move through the reading work that we're asking them to do so that they actually see their progress. It becomes visible to them. And then by working with them and they working with us to set goals, then they are part of the process and they know or have greater understanding of where they're going. And then when their growth becomes visible to them, they can become very excited and understand that, oh, yes, I can do this. I can be successful at doing this. And so the piece about self-efficacy can be a very powerful stimulus or motivation for students to engage in more work as well. So how does intensification, excuse me, I need to move a few things around just a little bit. There we go. So how does intensification differ across the tiers of instruction? So you have before you an infographic that examines tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So I'm going to give you a moment just to look at the graphic, and then let's talk about what we see. So we notice at tier 1, we have all students. We have one teacher. We have all students, those who might be typically developing in their reading skills. And then we have some students who are not being able or did not score well on the screener that was provided or were slightly below where they needed to be. And then we have some students that that did not score or where they needed to be, but we're at an even greater gap in development of skills. But they're all in tier 1 and they receive their instruction within tier 1 as a whole group or as several small groups as well. But you notice that instruction is provided explicitly and systematically, and strategy instruction is included, and we cover all 5 components of reading instruction through their core reading program. But then we might move to tier 2. So we have students who need additional work than they receive at tier 1. You'll notice here that we have a fewer number of students. So we've reduced student-teacher ratio. We have students who scored slightly below the screener's cut score on the screener that was provided, but then we also have students in need of individualized instruction. But then moving to tier 3, you'll notice that we've reduced student-teacher ratio even more. And these are students who did not respond to the Tier 2 intervention that was provided. Again, explicit instruction is provided. It's also systematic. It's highly structured. And as with all other tiers as well, it is evidence-based, but it typically focuses on up to 3 essential components of reading. It does not include all of the 5 components of reading, because you notice that we're narrowing down to that very individualized need that students might have. Okay, so let's examine a little bit through some examples of what this might look like within the classroom. So I'm going to let you look at this, or I invite you to look at this particular graphic for just a moment, and begin to consider what you see at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. You notice at Tier 1 that it only might require the teacher to model once. The teacher might do with the students the activity or work that the teacher wants the students to be able to accomplish. And you might do that with the teacher working with students. Then you might divide into quads for students to do the work together. Then you might divide into pairs for the students to do the work together. But then ultimately, you do want to see that individualized mastery work by the students. At Tier 2, the teacher might provide additional modeling for the students. And then again, even more of the we do piece, or this gradual release model together. And again, more modeling or more work with the teacher in the gradual release, students and teachers together, and then student pairs perhaps. But then when you get to the individualized piece with you do, there's not only peer feedback, there might also be teacher feedback. And then you might do it with a peer in the you do section, but then ultimately do it on your own as well. And then finally, with Tier 3, you notice that there's much more modeling provided by the teacher. There's much more of the we do section together with teachers and students, and then with student partnerships, maybe even going back to teacher and students as well. And then the you do factor, or the you do piece, always involves teacher feedback. You might even break that work down into incremental steps so that students complete one piece, teacher feedback. Complete the next piece, teacher feedback. Complete the final piece with teacher feedback, so that you notice that it's even more explicit, more systematic as you move through the tiers. Let's look at some additional examples as well. And I know there's a lot on this chart to digest, so we're going to dive into the chart just a little. Here we're looking at making instruction explicit. And we're looking at it across Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So what is the activity that third graders are being asked to complete here? They're being asked to identify the main idea within readings that they are completing. Something that I want to draw your attention to as well is that at each tier, explicit instruction is provided. But as you move through the tiers, that explicit instruction becomes even more explicit. So let's look at what might happen at Tier 1. The teacher, of course, writes the target skill on the board so that the students understand exactly what it is that they are to do. The teacher then explains the concept of main idea and details, and the teacher models identifying a detail in the selected text through a think aloud. But then as the class reads together, reads the text together, the teacher pauses for students to communicate with each other so that they have that talk and share time to process information together around the details. And then the teacher monitors what she's hearing to check for understanding. And then as they read, the teachers and students together complete a graphic organizer that identifies the main idea and then at least 3 supporting details. And then the students are expected to write a paragraph expressing the main idea and details from the text that they were reading. So what might this look like at Tier 2 for students who are struggling with Tier 1? The teacher, again, makes sure that the target skill is on the board so that students know what they need to accomplish. The teacher provides an example text with main idea and details, and the teacher demonstrates through thinking aloud how each sentence of the text contributes to identifying what the main idea of that text is. And she models the use of the graphic organizer that they were asked to use with the teacher at Tier 1. And then the teacher and students work together to find the main idea and details within another example. Then they might have integrated partner work where they're again completing the graphic organizer. So you notice the multiple times that the graphic organizer is being used. And then students retell the main idea and details with partners before they write their paragraph, including the main idea and details. You notice as well at Tier 2 that they've included or provided sentence starters to support the writing of the paragraph. And then at Tier 3, what might this work look like if the students have not been successful at Tier 1 or Tier 2? Again, the target is clearly displayed for the students. And then the teacher uses one of the IES practice guide activities around identifying main idea and details to engage the students, but he or she is also using academic vocabulary so that students become accustomed to that. So the teacher might introduce the work around main idea and details using the academic vocabulary very specifically and in a very targeted way, whereas it may have been used more casually before. The teacher conducts a daily lesson on finding main ideas and details and uses very explicit and systematic intervention curriculums that help students understand what they're looking for and what they're being asked to do. And then throughout the lesson, not just 1 or 2 times, the teacher models identifying this concept and helps the students practice repeatedly with multiple opportunities in identifying the main idea and details and doing that work eventually independently. So that's what that might look like in regard to identifying main idea and details at 3rd grade. Let's look at one more example before we close this evening. In this instance, students will read decodable text with accuracy and fluency, and this is work that students might do at the 1st grade level. And so you notice that we're looking at something that's systematic, becomes more systematic, and then even more systematic at Tier 3. So students are introduced to sound spellings using their core program sound spelling cards. They chorally respond together as they practice the sound spellings in isolation. They practice blending words together with sound by sound blending. They chorally respond as they read regular words from a word list. Students read aloud words in the decodable text to check for accuracy with the teacher. And then the students will whisper read and the teacher circulates to make sure that the students are accurate in their reading and that they are reading fluently as well. But suppose students are not responding at this level. Let's move to Tier 2. At Tier 2, again, you're going to use the corresponding core program sound spelling cards. You'll chorally respond to the sound spellings in isolation. But with number 3, the blending process becomes a bit different in that they're going to use continuous blending for a more scaffolded approach here. And then with number 4, you'll notice with tier 1, they chorally respond together as they read, but here at tier 2, the students mouth the sounds of the words before they chorally respond together. And then at 5, they read aloud the words in the decodable text for accuracy, with more time and scaffolding if they need it. And then the students again will whisper read so that the teacher can hear if they're reading accurately, but also fluently. But suppose they have not responded at tier 2, then we need to think about tier 3 instruction. And then with this piece, teachers conduct daily intervention lessons where they provide instruction that focuses on phonemic awareness, phonics, and fluency, because these all may be underlying issues to the ultimate goal of this particular target or learning intention. And the teacher then intensifies instruction, thinking about the cognitive processes that are involved for the students. Remember, memory, self-regulation, and self-efficacy. And then mastery checks are given throughout this new intervention lesson or curriculum that the teacher is using with the students. And so you can see how the work across the tiers has become even more systematic for the student. So we've shown you some examples of work in ways that we make the work more explicit, in ways that we make the work more intentional. So using the intensification framework will help guide the examples that you have just looked at. So when we look at tier 1 instruction, we think about holistically that reading content and instructional techniques. When we move to tier 2 and we need to become more intense, then we look at that holistically. We've looked at our data to determine what we need to do and who needs to be at tier 2. And then again, we look at our data to determine who needs to be at tier 3. We consider all of those pieces of the intensification framework in designing and delivering that instruction. So I know that's a lot of content to have delivered within a short period of time. And hopefully you've been able to capture all the links that have been placed within the chat for you to see the, to determine the pieces that we have talked about and to have additional resources. So I'm going to open it for any questions. And I think Donna might be providing questions, or Sarah, if there were any questions.
Yes, Mary, there's one question that came in about the relationship between the tiers of MTSS and special education. And so the question is, how does special ed connect to these tiers?
Wow, what a question. So that can be very difficult to answer, and it can vary from school to school. It can vary. I've seen it vary from school to school. I've seen it vary from state to state, from Commonwealth to Commonwealth. But in my experience, and this might not be others' experience, but in my experience, if students are not responding at tier 3, that certainly is an indicator that we need to begin to think about special education evaluation, so that the student might need even more specialized services in regard to a potential disability area. So if the students are not responding well, even at tier 3 with the most explicit, the most systematic instruction that would be provided, then we need to perhaps consider referring the student for an evaluation for special education services. That doesn't mean that the student might not be involved with tiers in other content areas. So there could be a student who was receiving special education services for challenges within one content area, but they might be involved in the MTSS system in another content area. So those two pieces can go on as well. It also, if parents wish to request evaluation at any point along the way, parents are certainly able to do that in writing as well. I'm not sure if I answered the question that was asked. Maybe feedback from that person could say whether I covered what they needed.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think it's important also to clarify that MTSS should not be used to deny or delay a child for special education services. So as part of the MTSS process, screening is an important component in that system. And if screening shows that the child is significantly below grade level, then they should receive intervention that's matched to the intensity level that they need. And they do not need to go through tiers systematically.
If
So I
it's
just
not
wanted to point that
appropriate.
out.
May I ask a question upon with that, hinges on this?
Sure.
Okay.
So often we have kids that are put in an MTSS system. So they go through tier 1, tier 2, and then they're not making any gains. And so they say, okay, in order to start the special ed referral, you're going to have to do a whole nother set of interventions. So that delays the process. Is that how it's supposed to work, or is MTSS supposed to be the process that's used for qualifying for a referral?
Again, from my experience, that's going to vary
Okay.
among systems. And in some instances, the MTSS system through which they move is satisfactory. In other situations, I've seen quite a different scenario as well. One would think that, though, moving through that process would let you know that you've provided more and more and more intense intervention, and it's not been successful. And so
Right.
maybe we need to suspect that there is some sort of disability area that needs to be considered. And so again, as Sarah said, we don't want that process to delay identification if there is a disability at play. But by the same token, some students may need to go through that process for us to know that they need to be referred for services because there may be some underlying disability.
Thank you.
So that's as clear as mud, I think.
And I think you're correct. It does vary from state to state, district to district. It's unfortunate, though, that services are delayed based on that delaying process of, oh, we have to do it again because we weren't intending it for it to be a referral process. I mean, it's not good. It's just a delay tactic, I think. I've seen that.
Very often that can be true. So are there other questions that were posed? If not, let me move forward then and just let folks know who are attending this evening that if you wish to make a technical assistance request, you can follow the QR code that is on this slide to that technical assistance tool. If you're not able to capture the QR code, then if you go to the website improvingliteracy.org, there is a tab or a button for making a technical assistance request. And then if you all would please provide your feedback for this evening. We are always anxious to know or hear from you about more of what you would like to know more about, would you have liked to have gone more in depth in any particular areas. Your evaluation and your feedback is so valuable to us The link has also been placed in the chat for those who are attending the webinar. But for those who are not, here is the QR code that is available for you to provide your feedback. So I'm going to hover just for a moment and let you capture that before I move on and let you know about the last 2 sessions in the series. Okay, I'll come back to the QR code, but there are 2 remaining sessions for this series. One on October 2nd, where we're going to learn about best practices for improving language and literacy outcomes for English learners. And then November 6th, where we're using an infographic to learn about the critical role of phonological awareness. And then finally, if you would like to follow or contact us again, you can contact NCIL through X, formerly Twitter. You can contact us through Facebook or look at what's happening with NCIL through Facebook and then through YouTube as well. So multiple ways that you can stay informed about NCIL or to contact us as well. So I'm going to back up to the evaluation QR code and give you another moment in case you needed that to provide your feedback to us. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, Mary. I could have listened to you all day. I think this was perfect information for an all-day workshop. Just hint, hint. We could, I think, in fact, I had someone this week ask me similar questions that you were posing. So it's very timely. We thank you all for attending tonight, and we will see you on October 2nd. Take care.
Thank you all.